Welcome to Cognitive Vigilance Podcast. Sorry we're late. Tech problems, per usual. My computer blue screened 2 days ago. Struggle.
And I moved.
And been moved. We're a struggle bus. But I'm really excited for our show today. We are having on Kat, who actually I know because she helped me through a situation fairly recently. She is an amazing person. Uh, talk about yourself. What do you do and all that fun stuff?
I'm very excited to be meeting you all. And I am an advocate at heart. So I started back in Wyoming, where I'm from, supporting folks who were experiencing domestic violence and sexual assaults as an advocate, taking hotline calls, and then also working for an organization that did statewide advocacy for folks experiencing all kinds of things. As a survivor myself, really from childhood onward, making sure that people don't feel alone as they experience difficult things in life, and then really going through that process of understanding how do we make change and create safety in our communities for people to find belonging and hope and courage and know that life can actually be different. So that's what I live for, what I'm passionate about. I am a mom. I have 2 kiddos who are wonderful. I live in Vermont here with my family and broad community. And yeah, I'm excited to meet you all, hear some questions, talk about how life can get really real sometimes and how we navigate through the edges of the world that we're experiencing together.
So yeah, that was awesome. So you're polyamorous.
I am.
Like our man Rin here. How did you start to become, like, how did that happen? I'm sure, like, I feel like you weren't like born that way. Well, maybe, but you know what I mean.
It was definitely an unfolding, and I am probably the most surprised of anyone here that I am polyamorous. It continuously finds me in a place of awe and awakening that this is a path my life has gone down. So originally, polyamory came to me through a book called Pleasure Activism. And that book really explored some themes. So I was at an organization really looking at how do we end violence in our communities? And if sexual assaults and domestic violence are behaviors that humans choose, how do we learn not to choose those behaviors? And so I was doing this exploratory research on what does it actually mean to break down those things as social norms. And it was things like, okay, we're not going to be keeping things in private. We're going to be open and authentic. We're going to share with each other our lived experiences. We're not going to keep things in the shadow anymore, and we're going to be outspoken with what we're going through. And then we're going to break down violence as a norm. Like, what makes it okay for people to be harmful to one another, to say things that are harmful to another, or to do things that are harmful to another? And where does that come from? And so some of that theoretic understanding was like, this is from ideas of ownership and possession in systems within our society that have been passed down over centuries, to really say that one person owns another or is entitled to the yeses of another or can take them away without consent. And so kind of like just really theoretically understanding all of those different dynamics that lead to possession and then eventually potentially to violence, where one person may take that too far and think that they have the right to harm another, to say, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And what happens instead? And so asking that question, what happens instead, is that every individual gets to own their yeses and their no's. And if I am really owning my yeses and I get to say to whomever I want, yes, I want to be with you, yes, I love you, or no, I don't, and no, I don't want to be with you. And if I really take the possession of that yes or no for myself, then I have freedom in that, then I have empowerment in that, and then I have courage, and then I'm not taking anyone else's yeses or nos. I'm giving them full rights to their own, full right to say no to me. I'm not taking something away from them. Instead, I'm only giving what I can. And so I really went through this process because I was married at the time of doing this. Like I had already been in a very committed, loving relationship when I started to break down those norms, and never expected that I would have this opening. So I did kind of say like, yes, everyone owns their yeses. And yes, to my husband, if you wanted to be with someone else, who am I to say no to you? And if I wanted to be with someone else, why would I deny myself that? Like, there's nothing else keeping me there. We can honor each other's desires and wishes and still love and support one another through them. And love actually can go beyond the structures of our society. It can open up those boxes. And just kind of alongside that, alternatively, friends that I loved and cared about reached out to say, would you ever actually consider this with us? Not ever knowing that I was going along this process of discovery here and kind of in my mind working through things. And I said, yes, I would be interested in just trying that out and seeing what it was like. And then I met beautiful people who are wonderful. And I never my world grew so much. And I don't know if I can really express that, except for all of my boxes were broken down, and I got to see the world offering me something new, offering me a place that I have found so much safety and love and care in a completely unexpected way. So that's how it all started. I think that was a really long, winding road.
Were you in a monogamous relationship? So you and your husband were monogamous?
We were, yeah.
And then you decided to try polyamory, and was he like okay with that? Was he not?
Yeah, so he is often the more radical of us. We are now kind of not related to polyamory, although it's all interconnected. So we are still married, but we are technically separated now. We live in a shared home together and we raise our children together, but we're not in a romantic relationship anymore. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But we were very much committed and kind of along the same lines. So he also went along this process with me and is I would say, an anarchist. So he is happy to deconstruct any kinds of structure that is holding anyone down. And so it was really this we have such a shared, we're from the same town, small town in Wyoming. Well, not like super small town. We are from a smaller sized town in Wyoming and have a lot of the same kind of cultural experiences, religious experiences growing up. And I think both of us were really just wanting to push against all of that. And we were able to do so together. And the experience was certainly is challenging and hard, and there were a number of ways it really challenged our relationship, but we grew so much together through it, even as like a romantic relationship was falling apart, very much still able to support each other with finding who do we want to be in this new world that we are coming up against and within.
So I assume that you live together, so you're probably best friends at this point type of thing, or friends, or is it like?
I mean, we are looking to sell our house and buy a new house together. And so I think I would share and feel kind of comfortable to share that we did not have a lot of other family supports. And I think what happened to us, so we had been dating since we were 19. I'm now older than that. So in my mid 30s now, and we've been together for 15 years and really raised each other. Our lives were pretty stressful. And I think we really relied on each other for everything. We were really each other's only person for so long. And I think that the amount of stress that we had undergone in our relationship and lifting up each other to grow and be whole people we still rely on each other for that. So I feel like we are more family now, friends certainly, but we're really like we've gone beyond what a romantic relationship was able to offer the other, and are now really just like each other's solid supporter, biggest cheerleader. Like he is still very often the person that I am texting. When I need some extra supports, or when I want someone who understands what I'm missing from home, or when there's a book that I need to share that only he's going to understand. Like there are certain things that we still just hold for one another, and there's a deep love and care there, even if our romantic relationship is no longer kind of able to be active because we're so focused on helping make sure the other person is okay.
Oh, interesting. So how do you mind how old are your kids?
They are 10 and 8.
Okay. So when did you have that awakening? Was that before pre-kid or after kid?
After kids. So I think my daughter was about a year old when we were kind of going through this experience. And this was also like the world was very different around this time. Politically, things were very intense. I think like I was also experiencing postpartum depression. Like it was a really intense conglomeration of experiences during this time. And I was isolated. I lived 45 miles away from any town, and it was just us out there in the middle of nowhere. And me being like, wow, I need more community in my life. Wow, I'm not okay. Not having family supports that were kind of like invested or around, and Brian and I being each other's only person, like that is not a healthy environment, especially as both of us had extremely stressful jobs. Coming out of that and really just saying like this, we are not enough. One person is not supposed to be the only support for one other person. Humans are made for so much more. And so it was kind of all of that together, and that aching for something deeper, as well as knowing like, but I still do want my friend to come alongside me in this process, and what could we potentially strive for and aim for, and how do we deepen and authentically show up in those spaces.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so this is very interesting to me. So at first you both decided to like move forward and be poly, right?
We did.
And is he still poly?
He's exploring a new relationship.
Okay.
Just recently. So he has dated multiple people at a time. Together, initially, we only dated people together, which was really lovely to explore and expand, like coming from very kind of, I would say, traditional relationship paradigms, and having been each other's one and only really beforehand, like going through that process of expanding and opening was really exciting for both of us. So that was really great. And then eventually splitting off and seeing our own people individually. So yeah, it was definitely a process of exploration there for a bit.
What would you say do you think that there's like a challenge? It's more challenging to parent as a polyamorous person, or how has it affected the parenting side of things? Or do you think it has no effect at all?
Oh, it certainly has an effect, but maybe, and I think that my experience, I think people have wide experiences. So I hope that in hearing what I say now, people don't feel like my experience is everyone's experience. And I hope that if anything, it just says maybe this could look very differently for everyone, and that there's not one single story here to hear. Because I think I've been very privileged in my experience of polyamory, and I hope everyone could have something similar, or that they're able to find so much support in it. But for me, speaking, I guess, at least for myself, and I think important here to remember is that isolation. So I came from a culture of isolation. Pick yourself up from the bootstraps. And if you have to rely on anyone, then something must be wrong with you, right? This kind of, and like, even by nature, like intrinsically a harsh environment to be raised in. Coming into polyamory from that background is, oh my gosh, there's so much love and support here. And that's what I felt this leaning in is, whether it's a partner who is not seeing anyone else, or partners who see many different people, or a community. I think probably the community which I reside in has been most surprising. I have just been authentic here and like, oh no, I'm polyamorous, and friends that we were meeting along the way have just really embraced us. They've accepted us in and not like shunned us or made it weird or anything. Actually, I asked them before this podcast to say like, how is me being poly affecting you? And I got some really interesting feedback, where one couple said that they are more gender fluid in their own relationship, seeing how my partners and I navigate parenting with our kiddos, and how they're able to have deeper conversations with different paradigms and relationships, in a broader sense, as well as showing like, so one of my partner husband made dinner for a different partner's other partner. I don't know how we want to talk through that, but they had just gotten out of surgery, and so my husband made them dinner even though they were like 2 partners away. And so the rest of the community seeing this happen has been like, oh, if they're all showing up for each other with these kind of entangled relationships, why aren't we showing up for our friends in the same way, right? Like if they're navigating all of this like emotional kind of extra stuff that people have in their minds that it is, why can't I just like bring my friends dinner after surgery? So they've also expressed that it's deepened the way that they've been able to show up in our community, just being able to see that like we don't have to be so isolated, and we can rely on each other, and there's love and care available for there if you're able to stretch your ideas of belonging.
That's super great. Have you encountered any like parents in your extended community that have like pushback or like kind of ask you to like, I don't know, not be poly in front of their kids or anything like that?
I really haven't experienced that. I mean, I've experienced some really hard losses. My father and I are no longer talking. That loss is devastating to me. I might cry.
I understand. I didn't talk to my mom for a long time because of not poly, but for life choices type of thing. And it took my dad getting sick for my mom to actually talk to me again, because it takes like a life thing, like something super hard where they start to realize like, oh, this doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing is that my dad hasn't shown up for us in any other way. So why does this now matter? Like, why is this the thing that is what makes it so bad that he won't want to talk, right? So there's that factor of like, oh, this is that line that has been drawn, is that I'm actually asking for support and I'm finding it. I'm finding it, and I'm just finding it in different ways than he would maybe want or expect. But he also wasn't there to do the supporting. So it's kind of this really hard thing to honor. Like, I'm not the person that he may have thought, but I am the person that he raised me to be. And now how does he show up in that space or not? And so I think that kind of has been a hard loss. But as far as like actually other parents raising my kids, and like their families, I live in a super liberal community, and I feel very privileged to be able to just show up and say like, oh no, these are my partners, and we're picking each other up from school today, and it's been a really exciting thing to just like the teachers have been very accepting, and their report cards are like, your kid shows up happy every day with their helmet in tow. Like, this is great. So I think that they're also able to see like, this might be different, but it's working. So let's just keep encouraging what's working well and supporting this family as they navigate a difficult life as anyone else might be experiencing.
Yeah, and there's a lot that's going through my head here, and I see someone in the YouTube comments that's perhaps being less than kind. We'll put it that way. But when it came to your father's situation, this is something that's very, very interesting to me because it's a concept that we talk about in these kind of spaces is the idea of a covert contract. So basically, what the 50,000 foot view I'm getting here is that your father, when he raised you, he had these implicit expectations upon you that you wouldn't turn out to be like you are. And when I say that, I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I'm just saying from his perspective, he's like, you didn't live up to the life that I expected, so therefore I'm pulling my affection and attention. But really, and I'm not a parent yet. I do seek to be a parent, but I think the perspective kind of has to be that like your kid is going to grow up to be their own person and they're going to have their own life that's going to be completely independent of everything that you did for them, and you have to be okay with that because you don't own this person. Like in an ideal world, we would love to see our kids be just like us and confirm all our ego invested beliefs, but you have to be okay with people being autonomous individuals. And I think we see this a lot. Like, I disagree with my dad on some things, but like at the end of the day, him and I have a very, very close relationship despite me not, growing up with him. My mom and I still have a good relationship, even though we didn't see eye to eye, and I grew up with her. Um, it's sad to hear anytime you hear about a family breaking up, but I think that, like I said, he is either going to decide that, the mental contract that he made raising you is sufficient for him, or he's going to decide like, oh no, I raised my daughter to be someone who's an autonomous individual and she can make her own choices and suffer those consequences, which by all accounts, in my impression, in our very limited interaction here, it seems like you're well put together person and somebody who lives a very puzzling life to me, but a fulfilling life for you. I know this a lot.
Do you want to, Kat, do you want to talk more about, like, we don't have to push into the dad stuff, but I'm curious. There are things I'd be curious to chat about if you're, like willing to go there, and nowhere is if not.
Yeah, of course.
Has your dad like cited reasons like I'm pulling because of this, or is it just like kind of the umbrella, like, you seeing other people, like it's bad for the kids, it's unnatural, whatever the case, the argument may be?
Yeah, it's the adultery thing. Wow. So, and what's interesting here is such the double standard. So he actually, well, I won't get all into it. So I won't totally go all into all the details because we just don't need them in this space, right? Yeah, we just don't need it. But so the interesting thing is that he messaged my husband and was like, "Hey, if like I heard all this stuff from your mom, and I am so sorry. And if you want to talk, let me know," without ever talking to me. And my husband was like, "If you want to hear what's up, don't listen to my mother. Call your daughter." Right. And like, you don't need to be sorry for me, as if my husband hadn't entered into this with full consent and knowledge. Like, why does my dad need to say sorry to my husband when it was a consensual decision on both of our parts? And why am I the adulteress?
So can I ask a question here? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like, I'm guessing he's coming from a religious perspective, and I'm an agnostic. So once again, a lot of this stuff is a little bit foreign to me when it comes to religious matters.
Is that true, Kat? Is your dad religious?
That's just what it sounds like to me by the way that you're speaking, and I apologize if I'm going too far.
No, I'm very he was not religious when I was little. And he didn't raise me to be religious. Sure. But my stepmother is religious. And so I kind of wonder, I don't actually know because we're not talking and I can't, we haven't really had a constructive relationship for a while, even beyond this. And I was religious on my own for a number of years. So I certainly, like, I have so much compassion for this idea because I held myself to it as well for so long and supported and understand. And there's so much beauty in a marriage where one is enough for the other. Like, that's beautiful. And how cool that they're able to find support and love. And so polyamory is not for everyone. And that's great. And so part of it is that confusing thing is like my dad would, maybe it's this religious thing. I mean, he did cite to a sibling that like, I'm just over here living in sin. But why is it just me? And why does it come, like, there's this standard here is like women often in polyamorous relationships are getting blamed for causing so much harm to the husbands without being like, wait, no, my husband was right there, like the first time that we were ever not like we were.
So
out sinning all over the place. That's
yeah, the question that I had though is the idea that kind of came to mind is that, traditionally guys would ask, the father of the woman that they're marrying for their hand in marriage. So I maybe that's just once again an assumption on my part, but I would assume that maybe he wanted to talk to your husband because, and I'm not here to psychoanalyze, but that's just kind of like my perspective, like, hey, maybe I want to talk to him and say like, hey, I agreed to this, I just want to make sure you're okay with it. But like you said, he agreed to the situation as well. So what's the big deal when all parties that are involved here are okay with this?
Right. And I think that there is like, I mean, there are some really deep sadnesses, right? So my husband and I, we still walk into places and people are like, oh my gosh, you're so adorable, like together, right? There's this, people can feel that coming off of us, and we were so cute for so long. And I think that many people, I mean, we used to get messages on Facebook being like, gosh, you guys are the dream couple, like just this, we were so ideal together. And so I think our family certainly bought in and supported that identity of, this couple is going to make it. Like, they are the ones. If anyone can make it, it is them. And so it is really sad that we are not in a romantic relationship together. Like, there's a grieving there that I think that my family was really struggling with, because it is a loss for them too. We were beautiful. And I think the sadness there is that we are still. And so when people are getting lost in their kind of, I would say, it's a prejudice, but it's also just like not like, my dad has not been open to hear any of the story that you all are hearing. Like, he's not asked, he's not had a conversation with me. He's not kind of dived in to be open to even curious about like, wait, what does my daughter need, and what's happening here? Like, is she just finding love and support and she's happy and she's got a really hard life, and maybe more than one person needs to support her because she's a lot, like, like, there's just not been any kind of openness to hearing, why might this work for me in a way, because I think maybe he's dealing with the grief of it and the sadness, because we were so great, and he knows that my husband is really great. But I think that there's potentially also just this like yuck factor that you might be seeing in YouTube's. I'm not watching the YouTubes right now. So
Yeah.
if those of you who might be
one commenter, you're fine.
One of like that yuck factor for the commenter who's experiencing that, you're not alone in that yuck factor. Like, this is so different. It is okay for you to feel that way right now. It's so different than anything that we've been taught or learned is possible. And our frames of reference around what it means to be open and what it might be possible to love. Like, it's okay that your body is telling you like, no, 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 that's not safe, because it's not safe. Like, I lost a father for it, right? Like, it is pushing up against the norms of our society that tells you whether it's okay to be who you are or who you're not. Like, there's so much at risk here. And I'm up for holding your yuck with you, because I was also very religious and never would I ever have done this like 16 years ago. Oh my gosh. Like, I probably would have been really mean and judgmental. Actually, I was, like, to people who identify as queer before I knew that I was also queer. Like, there are moments in my past where I am so regretful for how I like shut people out because I didn't have an openness or understanding, and that yuck factor was really strong in me. So yeah, no, like, keep feeling what you're feeling, and if you ever want to dive deeper into that, I'm happy to just talk through it.
I mean, and some people have a high disgust response, right? They're like higher levels of disgust. I actually have a very low disgust response. And I think actually conservatives have a higher disgust response than like people that are more liberal or libertarians even.
Right. Is that taste bud, the moral taste bud factor?
Yeah. But yeah, and in regards to the father thing, the one thing I will say is how I view it is I think that as a parent you're supposed to unconditionally love your children, and I think that it stops being that because they put conditions up. Like that's what I would say. That was like always the difference between my mom and my dad, right? My dad knew my lifestyle. I could tell my dad anything and he knew, and he still loved me even if he was like, you're a fucking idiot, but I love you. Like you're dumb, but I love you. You know, like he knew I worked at a strip club as a manager and he was like, whatever, Brandy, but I love you. But you know, and then my mom was like, I'm never talking to you again. You know, like so it's that unconditional love. And I don't really understand why that is harder for some people than others, to be honest, or why that is. It seems like it is certain. Maybe it is the disgust factor, actually. Maybe they're just higher in that disgust feeling.
Yeah. And I think there's also the expectation, like the disgust and expectation. And then also it brings us back into that rights. Like my father feels that he has a right to dictate how I lead my life. And I think, Kyle, that you were kind of going along that way is like, what are you subscribing to in parenthood? Are you subscribing to the, I'm going to raise this person to be free and open and live the life they want?
Or do you want them to confirm everything about you as your kid? Which, once again, my ideal situation, and once again, not a parent, I will always caveat that. It's you should want your kids to go on and be prosperous on their own through their own means, not because you did this for them, right? Because you should, once again, you should always want the people that come after you to do better, better than you, you know, despite you or whatever. And when it comes to unconditional love for kids, I would probably generally agree with that. But like when it comes to partners and parents, I definitely think there is reason to have conditions on those kind of love. But I mean, at the same time, you know, every situation is going to be a little bit different. And clearly, you know, it's unfortunate, but your dad decided that was beyond his barrier. And I'm sure there's probably people out there where they found stupid barriers that were completely unreasonable and decided to discard it, you know. So, you know, let's say if my mom treated me a lot worse than she did when I was a kid, then, you know, maybe I'd feel completely differently about, you know, conditional love. But, you know, I think it's reasonable to have conditions on love for people. When it comes to kids, you know, I think that's up for debate, and that's going to be for parent to parent to parent.
No, I mean, I fully agree with that. I mean, like, I think a
Yeah.
parent is not going to want their kid to date a heroin addict or something. You know, there's just going to be that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's looking at somebody like, these poly people are the equivalent in their head of a fucking, you know, like heroin, like whatever. It's like, oh, you're making like a social, like a pariah choice or whatever the case may be. I can understand a parent wanting to reject that. The problem is, you know, it doesn't go further than that. You're like, I think you're making a bad choice. Okay, let's keep going to Thanksgiving together, or let's keep, you know, doing the relationship. And like, that's where that it's like, hey, I think you're making a choice. You don't, I don't know. I also not a parent, Kyle, with no intention of being one.
Right.
Knock on wood.
Well, so like the one phrase that has stuck around with me for quite a while is ultimatums are the ultimate declaration of powerlessness. So when you give people an ultimatum, that's because you have no other options. So you know, if you don't have any other options, then all you're going to do is say, well, I'm completely done. Why wouldn't you have a, you know, a bigger conversation about ideas or about what you would like to see out of a person? Or, you know, maybe, you know, what could change my mind on this situation to make it more productive for everybody? Because as somebody who lost their grandparents very, very young, I look back at this situation and I regret every single second I did not spend with my grandparents, right? So when I hear about situations like this, I can't imagine the shoe being on the other foot, metaphorically speaking, and saying that because of one decision in somebody's life that I may vehemently disagree with, I'm going to cut off all communication with everybody in this whole situation because, you know, even if, you know, he doesn't directly communicate with you 100% of the time, like they're still your grandkids. Like I said, for me, I look back at this because I lost my grandfather when I was 15, I want to say. And like now that I'm kind of living a very, very similar life to him, I'm like, man, what I would not give to sit down with him one more time at the same breakfast joint that me and my brother still go to this day, like what I would not give to just have that one more time. And to take that away from people is just heartbreaking beyond words.
Thank you for sharing, Kyle. It is like there's that piece of the children, right? It's like, oh, but they're impacted here, which is so sad because they did have like I wouldn't say a great relationship with my parents, but there was a relationship with my parents. And that is a loss. And, I've done, like I shared with my dad, like, if you'd like to go to therapy with me to talk about healthy relationship boundaries so that we can stay in connection, some kind of relationship, whether it's for the kids or for us or whatever, that's what I'm here. Like, I'm here for that. And I got no response.
How did
And
you find out? Did you tell him?
yeah, so Brian and I told him way long ago, like many years. It's only recently, like when I wanted to invite a partner home for the holidays, that this has happened, and he wouldn't allow him home. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna not be with them for the holidays. And my father was like, but it'll be awkward, as if my family, my parents are divorced, my mother was abusive, right? Like, awkwardness is the least of what our family needs to be worried about. And so if that's our standard moving forward, then we've lost really so much if we're worried about being awkward. So it was really that, like, oh, this is someone wonderful who I'd love to introduce you all to. And not being able to do that, and me just saying, like, I'm not going to actually just not be with the people I love, and not I'm not going to hide that. There's really nothing to hide. Everyone is so wonderful, and so I think it's okay that people aren't ready for that. Like, I totally fair that they might not want to be involved. But then it's also that honoring of, okay, but we're still going to treat people like they're human because they're human. And it's that factor that was really like, I need safe boundaries around this. And if we're going to be in relationship with the kiddos, we need some healthy boundaries around communication, because my kiddos are in relationship with my partners as well. And for my father to be demonstrating a lack of humanity and a lack of dignity to them is not something that I'm up for. And my children are bigger than I am. Like, they are, gosh, if I am something to fear, then my kiddos are like the best of me. They're very, like, better. I don't even think better. I wish that I could put them into words, but I can't, because there's so much more than I am, and so much more than I will ever be. And I need people who are
You're
willing.
making me want to cry.
I need people who are going to help make this world better for them and safer for them to show up however they're going to show up in the world. And if my dad can't show up for me, if he can't show up for me, then how am I supposed to trust him with my children? And so I can't. And this was a really important knowing for me, is the people that I invite into my life are going to be, like, I need them to be safe people for me, but I also need them to be safe for my children. And how you show up and relate to each other and make space for each other in your whole experience, whether you understand or not. Like, so there's probably people sharing all kinds of things right now in chat, but, like, are you still going to treat me like I'm human? And are you going to treat my kiddos like I'm human? And if you can't do that, then, like, we need some boundaries until we get to a place of shared understanding and agreements. And how do we want to connect, and what can we connect around at all?
Do your kids know that you're polyamorous, and did they understand what that means? And then, like, and how did that kind of happen?
Yeah, so they do know that I'm polyamorous. I didn't totally, like, I wasn't, I came out to them unexpectedly, because one of my earlier partners had a child, and the child told my children before, like, very early on in the relationship, oh, your
that
mom.
feels rude.
Yeah, it was just,
Rude.
we should have had this conversation about consent. But the kiddo was a little bit older and was like, oh, your mom might be kissing my dad. And my kiddos were like, what? Fortunately, we were all there in this space as this conversation was happening. And so I was like, yeah, so some people think that you can only love one person, and your mom and dad think that you might be able to love more than one person. And my children were very young at the time. And so my my son was like, okay, great. And my daughter was like, can I wear my swimsuit? And that was really it. Like, so we there's a practice called circle practice, and I imagine that that can sound really strange, but it's a practice of sitting in circle with each other. And many traditions across the world have the same practice, but we practice this very young with our children, where you have a holding rock, you ask questions, there's someone leading the circle that kind of proposes some thoughts, and then everyone goes around and has a chance to share, and it creates really equitable space for deep conversations, even at a young age. And so we went around the circle and just shared, like, hey, no, we might have love. What is love? What does love mean to you? What kinds of love are there? What safe space, and do your parents still love each other, and what does that look like? So we got to kind of have really meaningful conversations with them, even itty bitty conversations in age appropriate ways, of course, around what does it mean to really be breaking out, and what does consent mean, and how can you deepen and open and still be really grounded in dignity, and holding the diversity of desires and identities that people have in this world. So they know that we're poly. They were in each of us our own relationships, and have met our partners, and have close relationships with some of them as well. So that's really nice.
And so did they know that you guys are like, you guys live together, but you're not like in a romantic relationship?
Yep. So, yes. So, and this, I think, partly comes from my upbringing was not safe. I was often not informed and didn't have like a good understanding of what was happening. And so it was really important to me to always be very honest with my kiddos around things that impact them. And so when Brian and I decided to separate, of course, like there's the feeling in the air of like what's happening, right? And so we sat down and said, hey, like, we love each other very much, but we're no longer going to be in a romantic relationship. We're still going to live together and raise you all together, and you are our focus and our loves, and we're going to make a safe home and still be family. And so that was kind of that conversation that happened separately from polyamory. And we've been separated now for, gosh, I think 2.5 years, and living together, raising them, and it's going as best as it can, I think.
Okay, so one question that I have would be in regards to parental models. So, obviously the traditional idea is that you have one man, one woman in a house, and then, there's certain male archetypes that people kind of have an idea of how men are going to raise children, and then certain ideas around the female archetype and how they're going to raise children. How does this work in a polyamorous household, and how would how do the kids work with this? Because I'm sure and I'm sure you've probably dealt with this struggle, and I'm sure you've dealt with it well, but when other kids kind of learn about your kid's situation, I feel like there's probably a little bit of like, I don't want to say smoke coming out the ears, but kids are probably confused because this is so far outside the norm. So how does that work, with kind of like your kids' expectations and then other people's expectations?
Yeah, so a couple of threads there to
Sure.
draw on. First is those archetypes of female, male identities. Kind of naturally, my husband and I have woven those in a number of ways. That kind of weaves. So, like in Wyoming, it was my husband's job that was really intense, 14-hour days. I was certainly the female archetype during that time, working out of a home office while they were little. Although I also was working 40 hours, I was doing the meal cooking in the weekends, and because he was working like 60, 70 hours, as well as having to drive on the excess hours of that time home to our middle of nowhere house. So that archetype was really strong there, which was really great bonding for the kids and I during that time. And then when we moved, it flipped a bit. So my husband's job got less intense, really standard 40 hours, and my job got way intense, upwards of 70 hours at times, or more, right? So that support looked very different. So he would come home at 3 o'clock and have the kids in the afternoon. I would be working really long hours, just because of the nature of where my work was at the time and my commitments and passion there. So there was this like need for him to step into more what I think society would consider typical roles of women, but are really just parent roles of who is helping make sure that our kids have food, that they have a loving home to come home to after school and making their activities. So those roles flip-flopped. And I think that we've done a really good job balancing them. As well as now I travel for work quite a bit, and are able to really loop in. My partner who lives close is able to come over and help in the mornings that I'm gone and take my kiddos to school, or if I'm not able to be there for any other reason, the community is able to show up. Friends and family will come over as well and kind of lean in and support. And so that archetype gets broken anyway, just because of our different work commitments and life commitments, kind of just outside of poly anyway. And then for friends and commitments, I think, I guess I don't really want to say push, but I would offer that the world for our children is very different than what it was for us. And they're like, one of my daughter's friends was recently like, my family just has one person loving the other person. And my daughter was like, yeah, that's great. My family has multiple people loving each other, right? And I've got lots of different other people, and like, that's okay. Can we still be friends? And the friend was like, yeah, of course we can still be friends. So, it's like children's lives are really already so different. And even like polyamory might be unique. But there's also like kids' worlds are so expansive, and their ability to hold and to really honor that each person's experience of life is very different. That cannot be underestimated. And I certainly have experienced that with their friendships. Like have kids' friends over and are out to the parents, and there's not ever that it's really hasn't been an issue. And I feel very grateful for that.
I think that there is this I would say stigma, or what people will think is they're like, oh, polyamorous people, they're just trying to make everyone polyamorous, right? Like I see this idea where it's like, it's being pushed on us. Like it's an agenda, like everything's an agenda. And I just, have you gotten any pushback at all? Or has it just been like very peaceful? No, nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
that's very lucky. That is very lucky. Well, I guess in Boston it's probably the same too. It's probably very dependent on your environment.
I think so, because I had this weird, lovely experience today. I'd love to share it with you because it is the most unexpected thing. So my childhood best friends, her name is Katie, and her mom is like the most shiny person you can imagine. It's this family that were Mormon, and my home was always chaotic, like just chaos. I think some of you might resonate, where it's not a safe place. You don't have necessarily your needs met. And you walk into this home where maybe there's laundry all over the floor or food all over the kitchen. And the mom is just like there, ready to hold and love and support you. And this was my best friend's mom. She was always encouraging us, like when we had talent shows and we were doing Men in Black and I held up the B upside down and backwards, like she was always just there to make it better and care for us and support us. I got a call from her today because I posted my cat and the pride flag on my socials, and she was like, hey, can we talk? And I've not talked to her for 15 years at least. And I was really concerned about what this call was going to be like. Like maybe she talked to my dad and it's going to turn into this whole, like, you come to Jesus conversation. And I was really worried. And she calls and she says, hey, I saw your mom recently and something's been on my heart for a while. And I wasn't sure if I should call you, but it's been months and I can't get you off of my heart. And are you okay for me to have this conversation with you? And I'm like, okay, yes. And she says, I saw your mom at a restaurant And she looked at me and was so mad. She started shoving her food into her to-go box. She slammed the table. It looked like her hair was on fire and she was shaking. And I've been trying to think ever since what I must have done to you for your mom to treat me that way. And I'm just so sorry, is what her words to me were. And I said to my friend's mom, like, I am so sorry. I've not talked to my mother for 6 years. You've done nothing to me but love and support me always. And so please know that it wasn't you who deserved this or did anything to merit it. It is something that my mom must be struggling with, but it wasn't you. And in this conversation, I got to share some of the memories that I had and how I probably wouldn't be the same person today, but for her love and kindness and support. And I also got to share, like, 'cause she was asking, how am I doing? She saw that Brian and I were separated, and really working through this conversation of, are you okay? And I shared with her, we are doing okay. We separated and we opened our marriage, and we're now going through this process. And I was worried about coming out to her in that space. And she says, I don't understand, but I have no judgment because I know we're all doing our best. And that kind of grace from someone you look up to. And she says, I know you haven't had a good model, but if ever you need someone to tell you that you're doing a good job and that you have what it takes to be a good mom, just give me a call. And now, I don't have a relationship with either of my parents at this point in time. To have that grace come back to me from someone so unexpected is something really remarkable. So it pushed back on my prejudices as well, for me to say, like, I wouldn't expect someone who is from a very conservative paradigm to come, like, the first time that they hear about polyamory, to just come and say, I can't judge because I don't understand. I think it really helped open my boxes too, to say I should really count no one out in how we're able to hold each other as humans. And even if we're not understanding, we can still show up for each other, and we can still honor the dignity and worth of every human, even if they're living a life that is so very different from expectation or norm.
I will say that I think that it's interesting that a lot of people would judge your situation with your husband, like, even though you guys are actually living in your house, taking care of your kids together, like, even though you're separated, you're doing you're doing something that most monogamous relationships that separate don't do. Like, it is very abnormal, but, like, in my opinion, I see this as something that is healthy, but isn't something that most people could probably pull off because of I I I can't imagine a monogamous relationship. Maybe, I guess maybe, but it would be very difficult for a monogamous relationship to pull this off, what you're doing.
I
I
mean, I feel like it would be like, I feel maybe people do make it work. I'm sure people do. But I imagine there's less pleasure and less joy in it. So, like, we found a way, and I think others too, to still find joy in each other, and to find, like, I am still a whole person, and I deserve joy too, right? As well as I have something to offer partners, and I might not be able to offer those pieces of myself to my technical husband anymore, right? But I have a lot to offer the world, and I want to be able to show up in the spaces and all that I am, and have found a way to do that, and that feels great. So I hope others, like, I think you're right, Brandy, that there are so many people who this might not work for, and that's great.
Yeah.
And like, I loved being monogamous for very many years. So all the encouragement there. But for those who it's not working for, maybe there's an opportunity here to step outside of the norm and still find safety and belonging and love.
I really love all of that. But I think there was an interesting aspect, and something that I've always thought about. And Kyle, I want you to weigh on this. You might be, better. To me, like, I realized that, like, kind of like the conservative slice of the pie is a lot of different like, monoliths within that. But not barring traditionalists and not barring like maybe the religious extreme side of things, like the idea of like the individual kind of like choice really, to me, poly like resonates with that. It's like, oh, do what you want to do and build it for yourself, right? If you're kids. So to me, that's always made more sense to me, almost from a conservative person. It's like, hey, like I'm going to reject. Maybe it's
more. I feel. I guess I wouldn't consider that conservative at this point. I could be wrong. Kyle can.
Like, I want to hear Kyle weigh in on that,
because like the individualism type of stuff. I think that there was that at some point in like more of the Republican kind of side of things, but I don't think it's there really anymore. I think the individualist kind of aspect is gone on like the right side. That's in libertarian, but I don't consider libertarian a right paradigm.
Sure. Okay, so as far as it comes like the political stuff, okay, sure, yeah, I would say that like the idea of individualism is kind of like faded away, and not that that's entirely a bad thing, but it shouldn't be forgotten, right? So we could start with that, but as far as like the idea of, I don't want to make sure I get this right, so that way I'm not charming you, Ryan, but like when it comes to like your perspective on polyamory being somewhat conservative, you're basically saying that like the not like inherently conservative, but like the idea of it potentially being conservative is the respect that like you're allowing people the autonomy to do what they want and as they see fit. So like essentially you get to choose what you do. Is that correct?
Yeah. That to me feels like that would resonate in that mindset. Whereas like keep going. You have it right.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure I got that right before I continued. So like the pushback I would offer would be that like most conservatives would recognize that like men and women are completely different, right? And like the parenting styles of men and women are going to be completely different, and we're going to appeal to like brain anatomy and basically how like different parts of the brain are wired differently between men and women. So therefore, like when Dr. Warren Farrell talked about this a lot in some of his work and some of his books, where like when there are like different ways that men and women will play with their kids, and the way that like they interact with kids will actually change the way the kids like exhibit empathy and understand like social boundaries. The way that a dad may play with a kid versus the way that like a mother may play with a kid. So like a mother's going to be generally a little bit more safer when they play with a kid versus like a father who's going to be a little bit less afraid and more, willing to push the boundaries a little bit, but also, come down a little bit more, I don't want to say authoritarian, but like exhibit borders a little bit more because they're more willing to be they're going to take on more risk in that play, whereas mothers are going to be a little bit more secure, if that makes sense.
I mean, so I'm not as big of a subscriber to that kind of like, gender line demographic, but I hear what you're saying, right? So, but that's archetypes, right? Like that's not, so you have to me.
Well, there is a physiological component to this too, because
sure, of course. I mean, like, there's physiological differences, but to me, like the archetypes that are at play, like, if you boil it down to attributes, right? Like, oh, the male is going to be more aggressive or more sort of things, right? Like, so if a mom is more aggressive, do you get the same thing from the child, right? Is it the aggressiveness that is the attribute that's causing these effects in children, or is it because to me, that's how I would look at it, right? It's like if you have parents who behave if you have
you're basically saying it's not inherent to the gender of the parent.
It's very So that's to me like an adrenaline junkie, mom is going to lead to a more likelihood of adrenaline junkie kids, just like an adrenaline junkie dad is going to lead to.
Sure. Go ahead. So my question there would be, and this is once again beyond my scope of knowledge, is basically like, is there maybe something more that's going on there? So like, are there maybe chemicals between the father and the kid that make them innately understand something. So like we know that like when women are breastfeeding children, like that eye contact is actually very, very important for a child's development. And like specifically when it comes to like vitamins and minerals like EPA and DHA, it's actually important that women get a lot of like, you know, oily fish and stuff like that when they're raising kids or pregnant, because that helps develop the eyes and the brain. So like that specific contact that I'm talking about, like when a baby's breastfeeding, obviously you couldn't get that from a guy because it's the eye contact and the bond with the mother they're sharing when they're breastfeeding. Obviously you couldn't get that from a guy, but like when it comes to stuff like more rough and tumble play, you know, is there maybe something that we aren't aware of when it comes to like that's just innate to men, maybe like the testosterone that the kids kind of observing, I don't want to say feeling, but like observing when they're around a male? Could they get that from a woman? I don't know.
I mean, poly parents have more men in their lives than.
I'm not. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of beyond the scope of that. At least where I'm kind of looking at this from. But like, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to break down those narratives that we hold, because I think really it depends on how you're showing up for your children in the end, and really understanding what is that unique child's need and how does it supports them for a parent to show up for them or non-parent to show up for them. Like my partner showing up and playing chess or talking about rocks, or even like I am pretty firm, actually. I don't know if anyone gets that in this conversation, but I am the one who is more firm boundaried around, no, this is not okay to treat your sister like this. Like I hold those boundaries really firmly. And so how it's about, I think more than maybe chemically what's going on, it's about the parent's ability to reflect, how am I relating to my children? How am I supporting them? How am I honoring? What conversations are they ready to hear, or what conversations are they not? And really being responsive to those child's needs. Like one of my children right now is really addicted to chess. Like, oh my gosh. And we're really having to go through that process of like, what is a healthy amount of chess playing? When, you know, like when does it become like where's the line of obsession? If you're crying at 7:30 in the morning because someone is making the same move over and over and over again and you can't get out of it, but you're the one who's choosing to stay in the game, you know, like we're having to really just do deeper conversations around this with that child, and who is the best person to have that conversation? Is it me, or is he going to best relate to my partners or my husband? Like who's he going to hear best, and who's going to relate to him best, and not shame or blame or put him down or make him feel less than, but really constructively support. And so I think that is a nice thing about poly worlds, is that it's not just as mom saying, hey, no more chess. It's really being able to deepen and widen the perspective of that conversation. And that's not just poly though. Like, so I think that's the other thing, is that people kind of get hooked on this poly dynamic, but that's really community. What community supports are we relying on? And for my kids, my partners are showing up as community members, right? Certainly more, it's like there's a deeper level of kind of connection there, I think. But it's really they're feeling supported by a broader community, not necessarily by an intimate like relationship, right?
The adage, it takes a village. It's just in this village, some of the people are fucking.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I think in a lot of villages, most of the people are.
Right. I think poly people are just more honest about it. Like you know, like everyone.
You know what? Yeah, to your point, it's kind of funny when I look at the political right today, and I see a lot of this, but they don't want to be honest about it. And you know what? I would have more respect for them if they were just honest about it. Like if you're legitimately monogamous, which I have been with my wife for 5 years now, you know, that's fine. But like if you want to go fuck other people, then at least be honest about it. But don't give up the appearance that you're still this, you know, trad conservative who's, you know, gonna save the West, but then you're secretly fucking the nanny on the side. Like I said, I don't have like moral problems with this, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't think polyamory should be a widespread thing. But at the same time, if you're honest about it and your expectations are up front, then that's okay. Like I don't inherently have a problem with that, but my problem is just dishonest people. And this is what you see a lot out of a lot of these trad people nowadays is just either, hey, I'm going to wear my religion as a skin suit to sell you something. I'm going to tell you I'm one way, but act a complete another. And like those two things are just absolutely drive me nuts because once again, if you really are about saving the West, then you need to walk the walk and you need to talk the talk. It can't just be I'm going to finger wag in your face and then go do this behind other people's backs. Like once again, I'll also ask for people's from honesty. And to the three of you on this panel, you guys have always been honest with me. As long as I've known Brandy, Ryan, and Kat, you guys have been, as far as I can tell, 100% honest with me, and that's all I could ask out of anybody.
Yeah, I will say when people are like, oh, like the destroying of the West and the things that people complain about, the degeneracy of everything, one of the things that I actually think is missing is community. And I think that even if you're not poly, there is a lesson that can be learned from these structures, and it's not saying, oh, that means what they're doing is better than monogamy and we all need to become polyamorous. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is a lesson, that there is something that can be beneficial from that, and that building of community. It does build if done this way. I think a lot of people have the idea of these polyamory like horror stories, a polyamory can't work because they know that one guy that
the complete mess of the life who's just
like everyone has those kind of like horror stories of it, but that doesn't mean that like obviously it can. And I think that what makes it fulfilling is an aspect of it is the community part. And I think that there is a lesson there for the conservatives that feel like there is this, what is missing? How do we rebuild community? How do monogamous relationships rebuild community? Because I do think that that's one of the big issues with the nuclear family is that the nuclear family is two people, kids, it's very isolated. And it's not as common to have people with like an extended family, living very close, living together type of thing. So it's like, okay, what is that? What are we going to do to build community now? Change the way friends interact. I think that religion was that too for a long time, but a lot of people are, tapping out of that or using religion in an unhealthy way that isn't really building community in a healthy way. So yeah, I think that that's something at least to think about. Even if you're anti-polyamory, like at least think about that one particular thing, because I find that interesting. Also, this is what I was. You guys found a way to stay together for the kids without staying together for the kids. That is extremely impressive. Most monogamous couples that tried this just put the kids in a toxic environment. Yeah, and that's what I was saying too. I think that is impressive because most people go through a messy divorce, and I think and who knows what's more healthy in the end. Like, well, we won't find out.
I'm a big proponent of good people are like, if you care and like show up and put enthusiasm and like, thought into raising kids. Like, I know this is completely different. I'm going off the rails here, but I love the stories of grownups who were raised on sailboats. So they were kids raised at sea, which is a very like non-traditional way to raise your kids. You don't have access to school. It's all these sort of things. And they're like, yeah, it was really like they do turn out a little different. They have a hard time holding down office jobs, but they're like well adjusted. They're very social people and they're very able to adapt to circumstances because, from a very young age, they're required to do like life, like saving like chores and things like that. So it's like one of those things, kids can adapt and you have all these kinds of things. But if you're a shit parent, it doesn't matter what your alternative life choices are. You can do everything right. Like you can be like married, go to church on Sundays, never cheat on your wife. But if you just fucking don't give a shit about your kid, they're not going to turn out that, it's going to be, that's a bigger thing, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's so sad. I mean, I think that's it, right? Is like, how are you showing up for people in your life? And do you have something to offer? And if you don't, what is that about? Like, if you're not in a place to be giving of yourself to your children, what are you giving? Like, do you have anything left to give to yourself? And can you start there? And I think, I mean, thank you to the person who said it was impressive. It certainly doesn't mean it has been easy, right? Like there's heartbreaks, desperate heartbreaks. There are moments of like big emotions to hold and to work through and to talk about. Like all of that is very much present. We haven't gotten into much of that in this space, but I think what we end up doing in our society, that we've kind of lost the ability to first talk to ourselves and to really understand what are my needs. And in a time of great sorrow that our world is experiencing, how are you showing love to yourself? And I was extremely like, I couldn't get out of bed, and I was in a job where I was constantly exposed to people harming each other, and to women and children experiencing abuse, and men too, and trying to fight and make the world different for them, and just coming up to this place where I couldn't, and really rocked by the sadness of all of that, and not able to stand up and exist in the world in a way that was loving and kind and generous of spirit. All of that I really like crushed in. And I think out of that came, like, I was lifted up by a lot of women who said, like, the world can be different, and here's how you continue to exist in it even though it is so dark. And how do you really find the courage to stand up and create magic and joy, and healing, which is really like that light in the darkness, is you have to be willing to stand up and show up and find a way to give it to yourself first. And I think for those who are in this place of isolation and disconnect, it really starts with yourself and finding that connection inward. And then once you've got it, what do you have to offer others? And to be open and follow that path. Because I think regardless of societal norms and regardless of who is not going to stand by you through that walk, honoring what is good for you is good for another. And if you have something to give and it is like, it's something that another wants to embrace and wrap around, then why would you not offer that to someone? So I think, I guess I hope to push back, or draw in and kind of tap into whatever that is, that for those of you who are also in that place of darkness, or maybe you're not and you're just like living it up, all shiny and bright already, to really celebrate both of those places and know that you're not alone in either one of those moments.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. This is different than what we've done in the past, but I've liked it a lot. I've enjoyed it. And thank you for everyone that has kept an open mind that might not have been interested in this topic, because I know that there are some people that have given some pushback. Thank you for sticking with us. And yeah, Kyle, give your thing.
Of course. Well, I just want to say thank you for the conversation. This show has been a very, very interesting series of conversations for me, and this one is definitely no exception to that. And I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wish more people would kind of come into things with an open mind and be willing to hear people out and their perspectives, because I've had my mind changed so many times on so many different things over the last 5 years. And if I gave you a list, you would think I'm like a flip-flopper and I don't know anything, but it's just because I find myself, I always try to be at least intellectually honest enough to admit when I'm wrong and to hear people out and hear their side of the story. So this was very, very enlightening for me, and just a very, very fruitful conversation from my perspective. And I look forward to doing more of this in the future. So I just want to get that part out before I get my plugs. But yeah, you can find me Kyle Matovcik on Twitter. Last name is spelled Matovcik. My show 5 till midnight on Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then obviously my other show, In Liberty and Health, 2 days a week. Lots of cool guests coming up, and as well as my band called A Common Crown. You can find our music everywhere, and you can find my podcast everywhere. So that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
Yee.
I'm still not digital. I'm glad. Kyle, thanks for putting up with us through the poly episode. I appreciate it. Getting some.
No, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
I thought this was really great. Kat, you're like, it's so hard to like. You're such a good example. Like, I know so many more like train wreck poly people, and like, like myself included in many ways. And like you're just, I'm just like every answer you give, I'm like, holy crap! Like, this is what an exemplar human you've been. Thanks for being so much for putting up with just us. This has been great.
Thank you for putting up with us. Oh God. Do you have anything that you want to plug, Kat? Or
I am just really grateful for the conversation. For those who are staying in it, that yuck factor, if ever you want to keep connecting around it, I'm open for the conversation. So please feel welcome to reach out to Brandy or Rin privately, and I'd love to keep talking. So happy to deepen this conversation outside of this space for any of those that might want to continue it.
yay!
Nice.
Also, I will not be streaming until I get a new laptop. So no hot takes. I'm currently on my boyfriend's laptop because of blue screen of death happened. So I won't be able to stream for a while. But thank you for this conversation. And I don't know. I'm a train wreck currently, and I haven't thought of. I don't have a guest for next Thursday. I'll figure it out.
I'll find somebody. Don't worry. I have some ideas.
Dude, invite your ex. I'm telling you, that's gonna be great.
Wait, who? The girl? She's not.
Oh.
You're, God.
Ghosted.
I hate you. All right.
It'd be a good show.
All right. GG's, y'all.